try to make me feel embarrassed. There are taps I've been in names, but they tell me I'm the one with problems. They're the ones who are insane, so for those who are but won't admit it, you shouldn't feel like that, cause you could be 20% cooler and 10 seconds slower. Shout it out. I'm proud to be a brony. Yeah, yeah. I'm proud to be a brony.
Hello mares and gentlecolts, my fellow bronies. Welcome to a special edition of I'm Brony and I'm Proud. I've got Aviators, aka Tyler Shaw, with me. G'day Aviators.
Hi, and I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you very much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
No problem. It's been a while since I've been a part of any show, and I'm glad to be back and a part of it.
Excellent. My listeners and I would like to get to know you a little bit better, so tell me about yourself.
Let's see, what is there to know? I mean, aside from the obvious, I assume most people listening to this will, be remotely familiar with what I do, but for those who aren't, I'm a YouTube musician. I do indie music. Mostly, well, not mostly so much anymore, but, about 50% themed around brony themes, whether it be stuff from the fandom, like fan fiction, or mostly it's songs about themes in the show. Sometimes, stuff I've made up myself, like what if stories, like what if the apocalypse happened, what if chaos reigned forever, and, I kind of take those concepts and run with them, and I make songs out of it.
Fantastic. Well, let's go a bit deeper, and I guess you've probably been asked this question probably a lot. What first got you into producing music, making music?
Probably the biggest thing that got me into producing music was listening to music. I mean, I went through that, I think most people go through that phase in their teenage years around like 13, where music is everything. I sat in my room, just listened to music all the time, and that was just kind of my world. And I've always been a little bit musical just because I was started playing the violin so young. Some kids start on the piano. A lot of people start out young with some sort of musical influence. And since I had that, I kind of got to thinking, okay, well, I'm listening to so much music. Why don't I take some of these influences and my love for it and maybe try making it? So I started out in the video game community, making some MIDI songs. I know some people won't be familiar with what that is, but anybody who's worked in video game music before will know what I'm talking about. And those are basically, kind of arranged, terrible sounding, but kind of classic sounding compositions that will play back, kind of like video game audio for PCs. And I had fun composing that and looking at others' compositions, and that was kind of how I got started.
Awesome. And you've mentioned influences. Whom would you regard as your biggest influences? And you've talked about video games.
Yes, I am a huge gamer, so a lot of the video games I played growing up, I listened to their music. Even over 10 years ago, I was listening to the soundtrack for Donkey Kong Country, Sonic the Hedgehog games, stuff like that. And those have influenced me quite a bit. I'm still partially active in the video game music community. I do OC remixes once in a while, which is basically just a site where people remix video game music, often classic stuff, and then they post it up for free, just for fun. Other than video games, I think most of my influences come from rock bands I used to listen to. Like I said, I listened to a lot of music. A lot of it was rock. Some classic rock, like Bon Jovi, Van Halen, Journey, Imagine Dragons, and Shinedown. Maybe a little bit of Bastille have continued to influence me in my music. It's not really like only what I grew up on type thing, with the influences. I think any musician is constantly influenced by any sort of sounds they hear, even just walking through a store and you hear something on the radio. I mean, it finds your way in your head and starts making its way into your music. That's kind of what happens. I just take what I hear and music happens.
It certainly does. It certainly does. So, the million-dollar question, how did you become a brony? Or do you classify yourself as a brony? Or how did you find yourself getting into the fandom?
That is a very good question. And the second question you posed there as to if I consider myself a brony is a very good question, because a lot of brony musicians are kind of shying away from the fandom. They're kind of going, well, they want to be associated with the musician community rather than the My Little Pony community, which I can definitely understand, because while I take the fandom completely seriously, it is very hard for the general public to take My Little Pony fans very seriously. It's just because I guess we're just not generally accepted in the wide world we live in, I guess. Which I'm okay with. I knew that when I became a brony, but I understand why some musicians can desire to shy away from that. I, however, still consider myself one. I'm not making quite as much brony music as I used to. I still like making pony theme stuff once in a while. There's a lot of story content in the show that makes for a lot of good music, lyrics-wise, and just for inspiration. And what got me into it, it was just browsing around on the internet and seeing people posting ponies on forums. I just kind of found it.
That's great. That's really good to hear, and a lot of our listeners will be glad to hear where you stand. Like you said, it's totally understandable for musicians who initially got into the fandom and got strength through that and then moved away.
I kind of have the mentality of try to have the best of both worlds, where I'm trying to make mainstream music right now. Since I'm still an independent musician, I don't have a record company breathing down my neck telling me stop making music that the general audience doesn't want to hear because it's about some show. And I still make pony music because it's fun, and like I said, there's a lot of stories that I feel like they need to be told through music because they're, good stories, and there's a lot of good musical inspiration there. And then there's also the other approach I take, which is any pony music I make, I try not to use, really blatant lyrics like mentioning pony or every pony or who's or anything really, really obvious. I started out doing that just so people would kind of familiarize with the fact that I am doing pony music, but now that everybody knows and expects it, I can kind of be a little more vague, and people are still okay with it because they know what I'm talking about. But then people who find my channel and aren't bronies, they're not really weirded out by the fact that all my songs are mentioning weird pony terms, and it kind of makes everything a little more accessible to everybody without me having to abandon the fandom for my career.
Excellent. And I like what you're saying. You're talking about having a broader appeal to a much wider audience. And it's a great idea to, in the beginning, to sort of play it safe. I'm not sure if you call play it safe by being a brony, going for that process, and then eventually getting to a point where you can elevate yourself or elevate the music to a point where it's more of a reflection of your style and reflection of who you are. My Little Pony is fantastic because it has that broad appeal. Like you're saying, with music, you can push it further. And of course, when people are just finding you for the first time, and even nowadays, there's still neo-bronies still popping up who are just finding out. And it'll be interesting how long that trend will continue. A lot of us are very excited about Season 5 coming out, but of course, what's been really great in the downtime, there's been a big avenue for content being created. It's a credit to YouTubers like yourself.
How did you get the name Aviators?
That was actually a nickname from before I was really active on the internet, I suppose, because I wasn't a brony till after I picked that name. It comes from the glasses, actually, but the reason it's plural, as in aviators, most people still call me Aviator, which is, incorrect. But it's okay, because it's confusing, because I'm one guy, and, I've got a plural name.
Because you're multi-talented.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. That's kind of the logic was when I picked the name was I was thinking, okay, well, I want a name that kind of sounds like a band since I do everything. I don't want it to sound like I'm some sort of pop star. I wanted it to sound, rock bandish.
Yeah, it definitely has that vibe.
And I like how that turned out. And I also like how I ended up using a Pegasus, and now it works for that.
It's a perfect marriage of OC and OC name.
It is. It is. It worked well.
So now I would like to talk a bit more about your collaborations with other bronies, and of course talk about your collaborations with musicians outside the community and how they relate to each other, or even, if they do, even juxtapose each other.
Collaboration in itself is the reason that I've stayed in the brony community as firmly integrated as I have, because there are so many musicians in it, like way more than any other fandom in existence. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because it's a creative breed that gets hooked into the show. It's just a show that appeals to creative minds. It must be, because there's so much art, there's so many fan games, there's animations, there's way more fan content. Star Trek, Sonic the Hedgehog, the furry fandom, nothing quite comes close. And I mean, other fandoms have a community where people work on stuff together, but I think collaborating has been a really great experience for me, and the biggest reward out of being part of the brony community, because it's hard to find other musicians who are willing to take the time to get to know you, get to work with you, without you paying them hundreds if not thousands of dollars. because that's normally how collaborations work. You hire somebody to sing, you hire somebody to produce. It's never usually a working together back and forth thing, unless they're just your friend, which happens in the Brony fandom. And, I've met a lot of great musicians, Glaze, The Living Tombstone, Pony when Kenobi, Bronyfied. I've met them, we hit it off, and then we just started making music together. Things started going back and forth, and we just had fun with it.
That's exactly what it's about. I know as a filmmaker myself that it can be very easy to lose that fun factor and forget how you got there in the first place. Sometimes that can be a daily battle, but I guess it's a show that provides a fresh perspective on life, perhaps, and you can't help use that as fuel in a collaboration, especially when you're working with so many like-minded people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's two sides to it as far as making music goes. Because one side is that it's my hobby. I love it and I do it because it's fun. And then the other side is that I do it because I need to. It's my career. And there are some days when it flops back and forth. Some days I'm like, yes, I'm going to do this because I really want to make a song right now. And then there's other days where I have an album coming out soon, I have work I need to get done, and it's just drudging on, and it's tough, and it's not fun anymore, but I still have to do it because it's work, just like anything else. However, I will say that even when music is work, it's still something I'd rather do than anything else. I've definitely learned at this point that it's one of my passions, which is good, but there's always a work side to it as opposed to the play side. There's the same thing with collaborations, where sometimes it gets down to the wire, you've got to release something, and the person you're collaborating with has not been working on their share of the work. And since I don't really pay any of my collaborators, I have before sometimes, but that's usually in non-Brony things. Normally it's just, out of friendship that we work together. But once in a while, they will just kind of, forget about it, or they'll have other things they have to do. And after a while, it gets down to that moment where I need something done, or they need something done, and maybe I haven't done everything I've needed to do, which happens, I'll admit. It's easy to lose track of what you've got to do, especially when it comes to music, which is something where you can have 30 projects going at once, and I'm not exaggerating. So yeah, there's definitely two sides to that, but it is, in the end, all about enjoying it and just making it about fun.
So very good words, really good words. Definitely words that I need to hear, and I'm sure there are a lot of bronies that need to hear that, and people totally outside the fandom who are creative. Being in the creative profession, it's hard. You were talking about passion, and it can be so rewarding, regardless of those challenges.
Definitely right when it comes to passion and finding reward in the end product of your work, because any creative feels this. And, when I am pushing for the end of an album and I'm having to work really hard, and it's, stops being fun and starts being work, even after I'm finished that, it still feels like I've created this masterpiece. And sometimes it's not even my best work, but I've just created something. And to listen to that something, to see that something completed, is something that brings me a massive amount of joy.
Same. It does feel like you've created a child and it's yours, and then you have to send it out to the world. It's like, okay, I have created you. Now it's time for the world to engage. And YouTube has been such a big part of the world, and sort of relating to what you said before, that unlike other fandoms, even Star Trek, which is, well, we've seen the documentaries, highly creative, but it didn't start within the age of social media, where content is so shared, so driven, you could say, and more people can see it than ever. I mean, I'm trying to adapt that model to a business point of view, but sometimes it's hard for me to sort of get going, especially when you see the need. Although, if people are already thinking about or embracing that idea, most often they come to you first. I know that's starting to happen to me here in Brisbane, which seems to be a lot more early adoption. In terms of collaboration, the way we can traverse distances is amazing. I mean, you can work with someone on the other side of the world. The only thing you have to deal with is time difference. It certainly opens up a lot more opportunities.
It definitely does, and that's one of the biggest reasons I think that the Brony community has become so popular. Not only popular, but massively creative, with thousands and thousands of fan works. And it's because the Brony community just surged to popularity at the dawn of the social media age. They kind of surged together, and therefore everybody started connecting globally. It was not like, oh, my friend next door is getting into this. It was like, oh, I saw someone on a forum getting into this. Now I'm going to find out what they're into. I'm going to find a little bit more about them, and it just connected people, it brought people together, and it created its own community without anybody trying, just because of social media, because people started to group. Because when you give people the potential to connect together to anybody who has a common interest, it's going to create groups, and those groups are going to spread. Bronies have been spreading for a long time now, and I know in the US, maybe it's not quite this way in Australia yet, but in the US, you can go into like any clothing store that has, fan shirts for Doctor Who and all those different pop culture things, and half the wall will be My Little Pony. It's just everywhere. So many people are in the fandom that it's just wildly known that people are going around watching the show. Probably have 4 in real life friends that are into the show and watch it actively. And the weird part about that is that I did not introduce them to it. They just found it. And completely by chance, they happened to be into it. So it's been this real phenomenon, and it's just been everywhere. I am glad it's finally hitting Australia full force.
Yes. I'm actually going to be attending my first PonyCon next year, which will be very interesting to be exposed to the community and, like you're saying, in real life, which it's a different kind of experience than the online one. Although, we can do so much online these days, it's crazy. But there is no substitute for the interpersonal sort of human experience. And it's even better when you find out that your friends have come to the fandom by themselves in a purely organic fashion. And hearing stories from other bronies here in Australia, most of the time it's the same story, that people have found out about the fandom themselves, or they've found out randomly. But either way, it seems to be, quite organic. I guess what I'd like, if it's possible, for you to describe a typical production process with creating a song, and if there's any differences between creating an MLP-inspired song versus a song that has a different target audience.
The processes are almost identical. I mean, other than the lyrics writing. Obviously, when you come to writing lyrics, it's a bit different. One, you're writing based off a story that's already there. The other, you're just using what's in your head. My process usually starts out with jotting down a melody. I usually start with music first. And then once I have kind of a general chord progression, I kind of have a beat, there's something there, I will start listening to that and writing lyrics to it. And it's at that point that I kind of start realizing what I want to write it about. Of course, what happens with this process is sometimes I will start a song thinking, okay, this is going to be a Brony song. But when I start writing the lyrics, it's not. It's kind of an odd process with writing lyrics, because I think most musicians can relate to this. And when I start writing, it's not always like a forced process. Like I just do it and whatever I wanted to do happens. Sometimes I do it and whatever's in my head happens, and sometimes that's not always what I thought it was. So sometimes normal songs become Brony songs, and sometimes Brony songs become normal songs. And of course, if that happens, sometimes I'll have to make a new song afterwards, because like if I had to make a closing song for the album or something like that, then I will have to make a non-Brony song. So I'll have to start over, make a new song. And that's actually part of the reason that I make so much music, is the fact that I will start what I intended to start, and then it'll get derailed in a good way. I mean, it's still a fully produced song, but it's not what I originally intended. So I start going another way. And then it's just different ideas spread off. It's kind of like a vein of inspiration, I suppose. And it just spreads and branches into different areas in my head and different areas of production. And everything goes in different directions. That's why music sounds different. It's kind of a cool process. Even doing it every day like I do, it's still really cool.
I totally understand that. I feel the same way about the filmmaking process. Although I come from more of a documentary sort of style where, I don't necessarily plan the shots that I'm going to do. I tend to sort of not necessarily discover them on the day, but sometimes it depends on experience. If you've been undergoing that process for a while, then that sort of formula comes into place. It certainly makes things easier. It's not any less surprising, especially when it comes to the editing room. For me, that's my favorite part of the process, when you've got all the elements together. And that's when the story gets really crafted. Not to discount the other steps of the process. And maybe it's because you get so close to releasing that child, that baby to the world, it's like you can truly shape it as much as you want. Of course, you might have a deadline to meet, or people commenting on YouTube, when's your next song? When's your next song? Or I guess in my case, a client will say, yep, I need it done by this day. But generally, I like to get it done as soon as possible, because the faster I do it, the sooner I get paid. Of course.
Right, exactly.
I definitely hear you. There are a lot of creative people out there, as you've said. I'd like to think that the Brony community, or even My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, has been a catalyst for an increase in creativity I haven't seen since film school, since ever. I think social media has been a big reason for that happening, especially with all the resources available, and one of which is a conversation, a dialogue that happens between a person engaging with the work, but not just engaging it as a viewer, but to be able to interact on a level that's more or less equal. The show is utopian in nature, nature, and social media is relatively utopian in nature. So it's interesting to see the sort of parallels come together, mesh together.
I think you're definitely right, and like I said before, they kind of surged in their time in the same year. 2010 was very much the social network year. I mean, it was existing before, but it kind of became a part of everybody's lives around that time, and it is indeed utopian in nature, and it has its links to what the show's about, and I think it kind of helps everybody connect, like themes in the show from everything that it's about. You know, we come away from that, and then we think, okay, now what? What do we do with the information that we just took in? You know, what have we learned today? As cheesy as it sounds. And while it may be a children's show, it's just ideas that people, you know, need to hear and things that people need to know just condensed down into a simpler form. And sometimes that's what people need. I mean, I know a lot of times people have watched the show and then they've been, you know, in awe afterwards of something that they did not know that they needed to know, something they didn't realize, something they weren't doing and should be doing. And I think the show pushes us all to be a little more friendly and get out there, meet people. And I think that's why creativity happens so much. It's because we're pushed to go find people who share interests, who share our abilities, help but want to do something about it and work with them.
And if we look at the world as it is, the word embrace doesn't necessarily come to mind. Definitely comes to mind when we look at the Brony community and the creators, because it has been nothing but embracing. And even Bronies who are just coming to the fandom, they're embracing the core values of the show. Those elements of harmony, you know, ring true for everyone, no matter how hardcore someone thinks they are. And definitely, yes, it does encourage people to show a vulnerability, embrace that vulnerability. And creative people by nature are slightly vulnerable. We do think outside the box, or situations or experiences are sometimes thrown at us, and how we deal with it is not confrontational. The show is as deep as, well, I guess perhaps the person watching it. If a person sees this is just a show for little children, then that's all they will see. But a Brony sees something else, those values, as a guide for living, so to speak. And we've grown up in a world, you know, sometimes it's so easy to forget those values. Even though we've got our parents, we've got our siblings, we've got our friends to remind us. But sometimes that's not enough. And you were talking about timing of the show coming to rise. And I'm not sure if it's a coincidence that it's come relatively close to 10 years after 9/11. And 9/11 did change the world. And there are many reasons, of course. Even if 9/11 didn't happen, I think we've lived in this world that has carried through and has more or less forgotten. Sometimes, you know, people say, oh, I didn't know this before. But I think we're born to know all this good stuff. And it's so important to be reminded of that from time to time. And if a show about little ponies can do that, I think that's great. And it's even greater that it inspires this whole external level of creativity that, in the end, feeds back into the same venture. I'll never forget one of the documentaries, seeing Lauren Faust's face when she saw a very large room full of bronies, and she understood. And that understanding is now second nature to all of us, I reckon.
I think that right there, Lauren Faust understanding what it's all about is an interesting moment. I just think it's really cool that she does indeed understand what it's all about, why we like the show. I mean, not only does she understand, she knows she put something deeper behind it. She put deeper meanings, something for people to see, to look into the show and see something inside themselves. That's something that most people don't do with shows, let alone children's shows. And then watch that, create this community, and can look at that now and know this amazing community was spawned by her creation. I can relate a little bit to it as a fellow creative. You know, watching people comment on YouTube, getting emails from fans. People enjoy, you know, my work. And I think that's one of the best parts of my life, is knowing that I can make something professionally too, like do it every day. And someone out there, many people out there, are listening, and they are actively wanting to accept what I have to put out there.
Totally agree. Acceptance is one of the things I crave the most as a creative person, as a creator. And when you do get it, it's a feeling unlike anything in this world.
It really is. Totally agree.
Aviators, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Take care, my friend, and have a great day, and catch you later.
You as well. I hope to come back sometime.
I'd like that. We'd like that.
Farewell.
This has been I'm Brony and I'm Proud. Lucky Knight speaking. Thanks for listening. Remember to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at IBAIPshow. Proud to be a Brony. Intro and outro by Black Griffin. My Little Pony, friendship is magic.
My little pony. I used to wonder what friendship could be. My little pony.